Today I'm joined by Cruickshank from 2020health.org to discuss the latest developments on the not-so-national programme. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Sarah.
Now, first there was this announcement that NPfIT was being abandoned, at least in its current form. But since then, some more details have emerged from the Director General of Informatics, Christine Connolly, that said that the local LSP contracts will be honoured. So what's your take on this? Is the national programme really over?
Well, that's a very good question. The sense is it is, at least in name and central direction, but what quite follows it, replaces it, augments it is, I think, quite unclear at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So many of the changes that were actually announced yesterday were linked tightly to the document that you published, Fixing NHS IT. I think that was published in March.
Yes.
Is there anything that you would have liked to have seen in the announcement yesterday, or anything that you feel was left out?
The brevity sort of leaves a number of questions open. I mean, I was pleased to see in the announcement that there was at least some commitment from the Minister of treating IT as an asset. It really is crucial to the future delivery of healthcare, but there's not very much behind that gives you a strong sense that that commitment is really there. So, for example, I would have been looking for some more clarity around the care record service. There's really very little mention made of the spine, in fact none at all, the summary care record. And when we go into the LSP world, yes, some more things have come out in terms of honouring the contracts, but how does that all fit with a more plurally led procurement approach? Okay, trusts may be able to go off and do their own thing with no penalty, but how do they continue to benefit from centrally negotiated contracts, those sorts of things? Lots of questions in the air. I mean, I guess across the industry, we're really looking forward to the information strategy as the time when some of these things, particularly around governance and the way in which the NHS commissioning body will regulate NHS IT in the future.
You've discussed there some of the key questions that you'd like answered, but what are your kind of concerns in relation to the announcements yesterday? I mean, when we spoke to some analysts, there were a lot of concerns about whether this local approach is really achievable, given that IT professionals on the ground at a local level may not be quite as experienced as they are in a more national scale. There are also some concerns around standards of IT, who will set the standards, and the interoperability, those kind of concerns. What are your thoughts on that?
I think those are all very fair points. I think they're very important, but at the end of the day, we need to come back to the patient in all of this. There's a very clear statement in the white paper that the government have a vision, I'll just quote this from para 110, for a better NHS that's less insular and fragmented and works much better across boundaries. And IT is absolutely essential to that. So I would like the information strategy to really talk about how that glue will be provided. But as all trusts become foundation trusts, and there is more competition, more trusts competing for business in a tightly constrained cost market, will the interests of the patient cutting across care boundaries be really covered?
So is there a concern there that this could actually lead to more fragmentation within the NHS?
Well, there is a concern, but there's one or two important words in the announcement, for example, saying that it's moving towards a more locally led plural system of procurement. Well, what does more mean here? I mean, in our report, we advocated that there was place for a kind of hospital equivalent of GP SOT, the procurement framework that exists in the GP world, and so that one gets the benefits of centrally negotiated prices, terms and conditions, and all those sorts of things, but that trusts, local organisations have the choice. Well, what is actually being proposed here? We'd love to see some more detail and picture around that.
So we've since learned, since the announcement yesterday morning, that ASCC in the south will be funded. But for those trusts in the north that are choosing to not take, for example, Lorenzo, do you really think that they're going to spend their money on IT, given the financial constraints that they face at the moment?
That's a very good question. I think some definitely will, because they see IT as a real tool for change, as an enabler of changes that have to come about. Others may take a more limited view, and that sort of takes us back potentially to the situation we were in, a decade or more ago, where it was a very fragmented environment. Okay, we've got now more national infrastructure, better standards, those sorts of things, but there is a risk that some trusts, don't put IT on the back burner and are very focused purely around the cost savings side of things.
Mm-hmm. And what about the costs of the programme and implementing these systems as a whole? These contracts are going to be honoured, so therefore the money, the 11.4 billion or thereabouts, has been spent. And those trusts going outside the programme will now have to spend their own money. So overall, is this not costing more?
Well, that does seem to be a real risk, but we don't have any detail which actually sets out the breakdown. I think that kind of more detail, more clarity around what the exact state of play is, which projects are decided, where decisions have been made, which are still under review, would be very helpful.
So it doesn't seem particularly clear whether this is more of a rebranding exercise or whether the national programme is actually over. Do you think that people who have analysed the National Programme for IT and who have been sitting there waiting to see what has happened will consider it a failure?
I think on first look at that, they probably will do. Certainly the concept of a centralised nationalised approach, which was what the national programme was about, has been. The statement is it's no longer required, but. For those of us who've been in the industry a good time, the national programme was our chance to really make a big difference and move things forward. And I think some of that still has to exist. We need to, regroup and go forward and make sure NHS IT is a success for the future.
And just finally, to wrap up, obviously this is going to have some benefits for some suppliers. Who do you see benefiting mostly from these new announcements?
Well, I think there are a few stakeholders. I think, first of all, patients will now see more, potentially better use of IT at the point of care. There are trusts up and down the country who just want to get on with stuff, and now they're fully able to do that. But whether they'll see the level of joined-up care enabled through IT that we'd like is a question. Trusts, I think, will welcome this. Many trusts, because of more freedom, local clinicians can drive projects forwards, those sorts of things. On the supplier side, seems like quite good news for the LSPs, given all that's happened. I think the smaller suppliers, SMEs, will potentially benefit from this fragmented market, a bit more nimble and able to take things forward. It's those other larger suppliers where I think the things the way in which the market is shaping up will raise lots of questions about whether they want to be in this market.
Okay, thanks very much, John.
Pleasure.